Great, thanks Andrea, and welcome everyone. It's really great to be with you all here today. I've been looking forward to this workshop. For those of you who I haven't met or we haven't been together virtually, my name is Nadia Kaiba. My pronouns are she, her. My background is as a social worker. And I am calling in today from Steveston, which is at the south end of Richmond, for those of you who are calling in from other parts of the province. So I am on the southwest corner of the Lower Mainland. And this is the traditional and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Kwantlen, and Tsawwassen people. This morning, I just wanted to share with you all, I went for a run this morning and I was thinking about our conference today, and I always like to think about how I'm going to do a land acknowledgement at the beginning of my time with people. So this morning, what I noticed was that there were a lot of people out fishing. The Fraser River is just, there's so many fish out there right now. So there are people on the dock fishing. There were sea lions and harbor seals also out fishing. And I was thinking about my gratitude for the first people who were in this community, in this neighborhood to my north, south, and east, who shared their knowledge of the land, of the water, of fishing with the first settlers. A lot of the settlers were Japanese in our community, and what I thought was really neat was just that we still maintain a lot of the practices that I believe they taught when they arrived, and that strength, I believe, is still shared within our community. So I wanted to start off with that acknowledgement. A little bit about me. I am a descendant of a Ukrainian, Irish, and French settler family. And my stepmother is an elder within the Northern Shoshone Nation in the Yukon. I love sports, and that's what's brought me here today. And my work as a social worker has brought me to work with you all. And I'm really excited to be with you because it's special for me to be with other people who believe as strongly in the power of sport as I do. So welcome and thank you. Our workshop today will be looking at conflict management. I'm going to be moving at a fairly good clip because my goal for this workshop is not to make you all conflict management experts by the end of the meeting. I think that would be pretty much impossible on Zoom in an hour. My goal for the meeting is to expose you to some of the tools and strategies that I use when I work with organizations and associations. And in exposing you, hopefully you'll have that understanding of how I might be able to help in my role as safeguarding liaison with VIA Sport. If you have any questions as I move through, if you wouldn't mind just saving them until the end, and if there are questions that are applicable to the bigger group, please feel free to ask them. If there are questions that really just have to do with a specific situation within your organization, I'd love to hop on a call with you and have that conversation offline if that's okay. Our workshop is going to, I'm just gonna move us forward in the slide. Our workshop is going to consider, sorry everyone, these agenda points. So we're gonna start out by talking about what the impact of conflict in the sports sector has been and is. I'm going to take you through some tools and strategies on how to anticipate and recognize emerging conflict. I will look at communication tools to address conflict once it comes up. We'll talk about prevention strategies, and then I have a group activity, so pay attention because we are going to put you into breakout rooms to work through an activity and apply some of the tools that I'm going to walk you through. At the end of the workshop, I'll talk about some of the services and supports that I can offer your organization, and then we'll move into some questions. So I'm going to kind of talk at you a little bit for the first part of the workshop, so please bear with me, and we'll get going. So just kicking off our workshop, thinking about what is conflict. One of the things that I've noticed in the work that I do is that people aren't always completely clear on what I'm talking about when I talk about conflict. What conflict is a disagreement with emotion attached. So if a disagreement is a minor contrast in opinions, conflict is when there's a contrast in opinions and people have gotten to the point where they're feeling emotional about it. And once a disagreement has become a conflict, it takes active work to resolve and it won't go away on its own. The reason I bring this to your attention is because oftentimes we miss those signs that a disagreement is escalating. And if we can pay attention to the emotion, then we're better able to jump in at the early end when conflict is starting. So what we know about conflict is that it's natural, it's normal, it's inevitable in any group, on any team, whether that be a sports team, whether that be a board or a group of coaches. I use the term team for all of those different groups. We know that conflict is hard for anyone. It's hard for me, it's hard for you. It doesn't matter who you are. Conflict is hard because there's emotion attached. And when we're dealing with emotion, that's a struggle for most people. We also know that working through conflict is necessary for any team to be able to learn how to work together and build the trust that's necessary to be successful. And when I use the term successful, I'm not talking about winning. I am talking about winning, but I'm also talking about people's experience. And that's something that I've with the sports associations that I've worked with, I've really seen as the priority for the leaders is looking at the experience of everybody within the organization, from the athletes to the coaches to the board members and the volunteers. So moving on, thinking about conflict, effective and prompt conflict or management of conflict at the athlete, volunteer, coach, board, staff, officials, and executive levels increases retention. It supports emotional and physical safety. It improves experience, and it develops confidence and life skills. It's always really neat to see younger coaches who have been athletes who have moved through the system using some of those conflict management skills and life skills in their outside life. So if they've gone on to have jobs and careers, these are skills that they can draw on. I'm going to just pop up a video that goes over the 5 stages of team development. The video actually only shows 4 of the stages, and I'll talk about those stages after the video. It's a video that I made when I was writing a book about conflict management in sport. And for that book, I interviewed lots of different athletes who were involved in various sports about how they manage conflict in their sports life and the impact that conflict has had. So it's just a 2-minute video to go over this concept, and then I'm going to break it down for you afterwards.
I've had some really bad teams where really nobody's meshed together, but I've had some really good teams where we've made some really amazing memories.
As the team, we had a few conflicts due to the fact that not all the girls joined together because they were all from different cliques from school.
Example is going through like conflict with each other. I think conflict will help the team like rise together.
Because if there's no team bond, then you won't work together and then you won't win games. And it's not a fun season at all.
I like it how at the end, Alexander said, at the you won't win games and it won't be a fun season at all. It's about the winning for him. So those were the 4 stages of team development. This was a theory that was developed by Bruce Tuckman way back in 1965, which kind of blows my mind because I believe that every team does go through those 4 stages as Tuckman believed. I hope that you are all thinking about some of the teams that you're involved with as you were watching that video and thinking about what stage you might be at. Oftentimes there's a breakdown when teams move past the forming stage, when everyone's polite into the storming stage. And that's the stage where sometimes teams fall apart. And to me, that's something that we can all work together to prevent. That's one of the purposes of conflict management training. The stage that wasn't in that video is the 5th stage that Tuckman later added, and it's called adjourning. And that's a stage where once a team has developed, they're then able to work in a more collaborative leadership style where they have team members who take on some of the leadership roles. They are able to break apart at the end of the season and come back together and incorporate new people into that team. So that's that last stage. At every stage, I like to incorporate the skills and strategies to be able to anticipate, recognize, address, and prevent conflict, because conflict is a natural part of any team being together. And being able to do these things at any stage will help your team manage the conflict effectively. So the goal isn't to not have conflict, the goal is to be able to manage it effectively. So my firm belief is that the secret sauce to all conflict management is through building connection with the people that we're with. This is Cassidy Caron, who led the Métis delegation in Rome a couple of weeks ago. And her quote was that relationships are built over 100 cups of tea. So when she was asked what that was like, what was that like as a descendant of residential school survivors to go and talk to the Pope and ask for an apology? This was her comment. And I will never forget this personally, because I just think that she is open. She recognizes that importance of connection and spending time with people in order to work through problems. And I hope that all of you are also able to take that away. One of the things that I focus on when I'm doing my training are on connection building activities. So giving people an opportunity to get to know one another outside of the sport, and doing that in a really intentional way. So rather than taking your team or your board out for dinner or to go bowling where people just hang out with the same people that they've always hung out with, doing intentional connection building. Once you know another person, it's much easier to manage conflict when it comes up, once you have built that connection and that relationship. So I'm going to just do that right now with you all. We're gonna have an opportunity to try and build a little bit of connection. So I would like everybody who has their cameras turned on to please turn them off. Okay. So please turn on your camera if you consider yourself to be extroverted. Okay. Thanks, everyone. So you can turn off your cameras now, my extroverts. So please turn on your camera if you consider yourself to be introverted. Well, I thought you guys would be reluctant to turn on your cameras. Okay. Thanks, everyone. So you can turn off your cameras now. Please turn on your cameras if you're an introverted extrovert. Ooh, Josh, Katie, Valerie, Aaron, Gail, good. Catherine, introverted extrovert. So that I know that you all know each other much better than I know you. So hopefully you learned a little bit about each other just now. Please put in, everybody can turn off or on their cameras, whatever you're more comfortable with. My next connection building question for you is, please put in the chat, are you a mountain person or a beach person? Well, it's kind of, I think it's kind of split. Beach, but only if it's rocky. Okay, that's very specific from Lisa. Thank you. Okay, now please put in the chat if you're a cat, dog, or hamster person. My goodness, where's all my cat people? Oh. I like that dog, but I have a cat. Awesome. So keep sharing. This is a chance to get to know each other. You can see just from doing that for a couple of, oh, and Andrea. Andrea's got a black cat like I do. You can see just from doing that 2-minute activity on Zoom in a webinar where there's very little interaction with one another that you can build connection. It doesn't take long. I would encourage you to encourage the people that you lead and that you work with, and on your own boards, in your own groups, to do connection, intentional connection building as much as you can. I've got lots of resources up for ideas, for questions that you can ask and use. So that's something, Andrea, I guess I'll send over to Via Sport. I have a PDF for that. The next activity that I wanted to talk about when we're thinking about anticipating conflict is establishing group guidelines. So maybe I could get just a show of hands for those of you, when you're thinking about the teams that you lead, even if it's a board, whatever team that you lead, put up your hand if you establish group guidelines at the beginning of your work together. Put up your Zoom hand or your camera on hand. Thanks, Nathan and Andrea. Valerie. Okay. Like Kim's given us a little round of applause that she does it. That's great. So a lot of you are doing this already. This is a strategy that is very effective in, as you probably already know, since you all do this, that's really effective in preventing conflict, in anticipating conflict, and in managing when it comes up. So it kind of fits into all of those times when you're going to be managing conflict. One of the things that I've seen a lot are people or groups who will do a list of guidelines. Maybe it's a coach who has it posted in the locker room, or a board. Sometimes I walk into board offices and there's a list, like a laminated list of group guidelines up on the wall, or it'll be like group rules or whatever they've called it. And I'm always kind of curious who developed the guidelines. So was it done as a group, that it was something that was done meaningfully, where they discussed what the different guidelines mean to each person, or was it done by one person who wanted to list off the guidelines that were important to them? I would encourage you all to do guidelines together as a group so that it is meaningful for everyone who's involved. If new people join your team, do them again so that that person's voice is in the guidelines. Review them regularly, make adjustments as needed. Make sure that you're really clear. So think about listing behaviors rather than values. So rather than saying be respectful, talk with the group about, well, what does respect look like? How will we demonstrate respect in this group? Are we going to have face-to-face conversations when conflict comes up? Are we going to reply to emails regularly? Are we going to be on time? Are we going to be, all of those demonstrative behaviors? To be careful not to be vague. And then make a list for every context that your team will be in together, whether that be if you're a coach, whether that be in practice, in competition, when you're traveling. If you're on a board, you may have to travel and go to meetings or do some outreach in the community. So thinking about how guidelines may change depending on where you are, what the context is. As a social worker, this piece is really important, and I think that it's something that's very important to be a sport, to be thinking about inclusivity and what are we doing, what actions are we doing to ensure that we are considering inclusion and we are thinking about retention of marginalized groups within sport. So managing conflict by being trauma-informed, strength-based, and culturally agile. I've given some examples of each underneath here, just some questions that you might be able to ask. So if we're thinking about being trauma-informed, maybe we're working with somebody who's Indigenous, who's there's something about residential schools in the news, rather than ignoring it, pretending that it hasn't happened, addressing it. I heard about a tragedy in the news today. You can name what it is. What does that mean to you? How can I support you? Being strength-based, thinking about rather than being deficit-based when you're working with your colleagues or athletes. I see that you made it to practice after a tough meet yesterday. How did you do that? So thinking about that inner strength that they've used. Being culturally agile. So rather than the example I gave here is being careful that you're pronouncing people's names correctly, and then practicing it on your own time. So not saying, how do you say your name again? How do you say your name again? If it's a name that's of a culture that's different than your own. Small things like that show cultural agility. And then what are your preferred pronouns is an example of something that all three of these apply to. So thinking about gender diversity and making sure that we ask those types of questions. Not just asking them yourself, role modeling this and expecting the people who are in your team or your group to also be asking these questions and considering these approaches. Okay. So when we're thinking about addressing conflict, one of the things that's important to do is consider any assumptions that we've been making. This is a tool that I train. It's an adaptation of the ladder of inference, and it's called the circle of inference. So the way it works is that you think about something that happened. You think about any facts that you've taken out of that. So by virtue of who you are, we all do this, you select certain facts that you're going to hang on to. Then thinking about any assumptions that you're making about those selected facts. We tend to then form beliefs based on our assumptions, and then we take action. So if we think about an example, I'm skipping ahead. And then in between here, you'll see some blobs of mush, and that's what we call interpersonal mush. And what interpersonal mush is when we talk to other people about something that's happened, and then we build stories based on their stories. So we don't actually know what the facts are. We're building stories based on other people's assumptions. And that's what's called interpersonal mush. I'm guessing that many of you can insert scenarios into this cycle. And by using a cycle like this and training your members with a cycle like this, it slows things down. It slows down that assumption making process when problems come up. We can even use the language and say, oh, I think I'm jumping on the circle. I think I'm making an assumption. Help me to understand. So it's a strategy to be able to address conflict once it's coming up. Jennifer, I thought you would like this one. I stole this one from BC Artistic Swimming because it's such a great analogy of moving from positions to interests. This is a strategy that mediators use. I'm guessing that many of you as leaders have also used a strategy that's similar to this. When we move from positions to interests, we consider people who are using really positional language or behavior. So it could be that a parent is saying, or a coach or a board member saying something like, parents can't come on deck. And that's a position. When we think about interest, that's what's important to everyone who's involved. So if I think about that example, what's important would be athletes understanding the direction that's being given by the coaches. And if it's a parent, it's their daughter understanding the instructions. So the scenario that I'm going to back up, the scenario that I based this on is that a swim coach came to me a while back and said to me, you know, Nadia, I'm having a really tough time because this parent keeps coming on the deck and they're not listening to me. I've sent out emails with the code of conduct to the whole group and the parent's still coming on deck. And so when I was talking to this coach, I tried to get them to break it down into positions and interests. So when you're thinking about any type of conflict or issue, moving from positions to interests is really the basis of all conflict management and the key. So if you are thinking about a problem and you have a fixed solution, likely you're being positional in that moment. When we think about problems, it's important to do it in collaboration with the people who are also involved in the problem. And that's moving to an interest-based model where you're creating an all-win situation rather than that positional win-lose outcome. So this is just a slide about a reminder, and likely many of you do this, about asking the power of asking open-ended questions. So for thinking about communication, asking open-ended questions is incredibly powerful. One of the other jobs that I do is I train forensic interviewing, and that's all about asking open-ended questions. If you want to get lots of rich information about the people that you're working with, if you want to understand what's happening, you need to be asking open-ended questions. My challenge to you is to, in the next day or so, think about the questions that you're asking whenever you ask a question and consider whether or not it can be answered with yes or no. And if that's the case, then you're asking a closed question, and try and reframe the question with an open-ended question and see how much more information you get. Why is an open-ended question, but it also can be kind of sometimes viewed as a judgmental question. Why did you do that? Why did you do that, Andrea? You know, even if it's, why did you do that, Andrea? Or, you know, its tone of voice has a lot to do with it. So if you're using why questions, please use them sparingly. When I work with groups and I train them, we do different activities that help them to get comfortable with using open-ended questions. Giving and receiving feedback, another really important aspect of working on teams and in groups. This model is the SWIM model, where feedback should be specific. You're giving concrete examples of what you're giving feedback about, starting with what's working well and limiting it one or two things rather than overwhelming people. Looking for opportunities for improvement, again, just one or two things, and then making sure that things are measurable. So if you're giving a board member, if you're giving a coach, if you're giving an athlete feedback, setting up a second meeting where you can discuss the feedback and make sure that it is measurable so that they can see any changes, or they can talk to you about making change. I have the myth of likability up here on the slide because when I'm training groups, they have a really tough time giving the opportunities for improvement part of the feedback. They really enjoy the what's working well aspect, but it's training the people that we work with in being comfortable, with giving feedback. And there's that myth of likability that if you're always saying nice things to people, people will like you more. And I think, I don't know if it's a Canadian thing, but we often get sucked into that. But really, when we give people honest feedback and we frame it in a way that they can receive it, what we're doing is building trust. And once we've built trust, then we deepen our connection. Here's a tricky conversation script. There's lots of different tricky conversation scripts. This one is based on the nonviolent communication model. This is the one that I use in my training, where you start by thanking the other person for speaking to you, describing the problem starting with I, talk about how the problem is making you feel. So making sure that you're really tapping into how are you feeling. So that coach who had the parent on the deck, he was feeling undermined. He was feeling like his coaching abilities were being challenged and questioned. Just being careful not to say something like, I feel that you. Explaining your need, thinking about what your need is in order to feel better about the problem, and then having a request, so suggesting a solution that might benefit both of you. So again, I do training on this. I get people to practice this, and this is a conversation starter. This isn't the whole conversation. It's not a script for the whole conversation. It's a script just to start the conversation off, because what we know about conflict is people are scared to have face-to-face conversations when they have to say tough things. So if you can practice and prepare ahead of time, if you have a script and you're using language that the other person will be able to receive, then you're much more able to have that face-to-face conversation and work through the conflict. Here's a few hot spots. If you remember nothing else from today, one of the most impactful things I believe in conflict escalating and not being managed effectively is overusing email to communicate. I can't tell you how many associations within sport and within government or the business sector who want to show me all of their emails when they're talking about a conflict. Well, look what they emailed back, and look at this, and this is what I sent them, and this. And I believe that no conflict, no true conflict where there's emotion attached has ever been resolved using email to communicate. I think that email is something that we rely on because conflict's uncomfortable. And my challenge and my hope is that all of us can become better at not emailing through conflict, but using an email to invite someone to a difficult conversation. I train being careful about labeling. So rather than using terms like bullying, trying to describe behavior. Jennifer, you've got your hand up.
Sorry, I just wanted to, before we move on from the email communicate, I wanted to comment. The one thing we have found though is that it's important after having that conversation to maybe reiterate the outcomes of the conversation by email so that you have it in writing, because that's gotten lost down the road when things come back in circle. So it plays a role, but that face-to-face or verbal communication and discussion is so very important, but often a follow-up with what the outcome of that was is very important too.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. I 100% agree. And the thing with the follow-up that I think is key is that it's a way of checking in to make sure that you both have the same understanding of the conversation and that you're on the same page. So sometimes when you're having that face-to-face conversation, you don't necessarily know what's happening on the other end. So then having that written email is really important. Thanks for adding that, Jennifer. I 100% agree with that. The me theory, where we think about everything in terms of what you would have done, what I would have done in a situation, paying attention to that. Ignoring or waiting too long. If you see conflict happening and you're a leader within a team or an organization, it's not going to go away. If you see people eye rolling, if you see people showing signs that there's conflict, it's really important to not wait and think that it's going to get resolved on its own. It's important to work through it as soon as possible. I often have coaches who say, oh, I thought that, the athletes would work it out on their own. I was giving them the opportunity to do that. And that's great. They may need support to be able to do that. So it's important to jump in there. Asking closed-ended questions, leaving families out. So having families not be in the loop when conflict is coming up doesn't mean that they're not involved. So including them in conversations when it's appropriate, and that's a fine line, and I know it's a balancing act and a juggling act, but when you leave families out, they're still going to be involved even if we don't see them. And then of course, establishing really clear boundaries.
Nadia, just a time check. We've got about 20 minutes left.
Perfect. So I know, thank you, Andrea. I know I just went through a lot of information. I wanted to make sure I touched on what I think are some pretty key points that I use in my training. I've popped up a scenario here. What we're going to do now is go into breakout rooms, and you're going to have 10 minutes to work through the scenario. And I want you to think about the two questions that are at the bottom. Think about some of the concepts that I went through with you just now, and of course, tapping into your own experience, and then we'll come back and debrief. Andrew, do you think we should do more like 7 minutes, or what do you think, time-wise?
I'd like to give people the time. I'd like to give them the 10 minutes, and maybe we make sure that people debrief quickly afterwards. Nadia, the breakout rooms are set up. I don't know if you want to open them so that you can share your slide. Otherwise, can we copy that text and just drop it into the chat before we open the breakout rooms?
Sure, I can do that.
Yeah. Does anyone have any questions before we head into the rooms? Oh, hang on. I've just noticed that it's Nadia, you're going to get dropped into a room. You'll just have to pop out. So there'll be one group with just 2 people. You're on mute.
Gosh, you'd think I'd have Zoom figured out by now. I said, okay, my comment was, okay.
All right, so whenever you're ready, Nadia, you can open those up. They're set to, it's got a 9-minute timer, folks. So you'll have the timer in the room, and then there'll be a 60-second countdown timer. So you'll have 10 minutes total. Oh, okay. There will be another group that'll just be 2 people. Josh, that'll be your group. Just somebody's driving and can't participate, so that's fine. Thanks for the heads up.
Andrea, I can't share to the breakout rooms. I can't.
Okay. Okay, I was going to say just copy the text from your PowerPoint and drop it into the chat, because that way people will have the instructions when they go. Actually, oh, there you go. Okay, so that'll be there. So you can check in your chat once you get into your breakout room if you need a little reminder, and we will see you in 10 minutes. Oh yeah, okay, that's good. Welcome back.
not, some people are probably trying
You
to.
guys hit the leave room button, didn't you? Everyone else will get teleported out of their room in a sec.
We were just super efficient.
Yeah.
I just assumed that was going to happen. So I was like, okay, leave.
All right, looks like we've got everybody back.
Great. So thank you very much. We, in the interest of time, we won't debrief that as a big group. What I would invite you to do is if you have any questions about that scenario or anything else, I'm going to share my contact information at the end, and I would love to hop on a call with you. Andrea is going to pull up a Menti for us to complete so we can capture a little bit of information about what some of your needs are.
Yeah.
And then I'll share my contact.
Okay, so just keeping an eye on time. So we've got 7 minutes left. Having gone through this content now and sat through the presentation from Nadia, I'm really conscious that you're not the only people who might benefit from this. And I know that getting these messages out to your whole organization and to your clubs is important. So if you think about that in your specific sport, we'll have this recording, but we can create other content as well if we need it. But who should that training be for? Who would you like us to try and reach with this content? So if you haven't used Menti before, and I don't know how many people are left out there that haven't, you just go to menti.com and put in the code that's at the top of the slide there. Somebody. Okay. Okay, so we've got some feedback that it is important to reach the LSOs and clubs, and not just coaches, but staff and officials as well. We need some help with that. And so if you have ideas about how we can reach those people, that would be really useful. We're quite conscious that we don't want to go around the PSOs, DSOs, and MSOs that we work with, but we do want to help get the message out. So if you've got ideas, please email me with those or phone me. If it's going to be a difficult conversation, even if it's not, feel free to call me anytime. And as you know, we'll try and make this particular workshop, the recording, we'll put it on our learning center along with the slide deck so that you can share that out to whoever you need. Okay. All right, we're going to move on to the next slide here. We're going to try. There we go. So just trying to think about in the next year to help us scope out the services that we can provide. What support would you like? Just thinking about the next year. So workshops, one-to-one coaching through Nadia, little groups of small group coaching, facilitation of meetings. We can do all kinds of other resources as well. So it would really help us if you could let us know what would be useful to you. Those are some quick answers on the how-to videos.
Andrea, I'll just comment that this question only allowed you to select one. So,
oh yeah, I tried to find a setting to allow more than that, but thank you for pointing that out.
so I would have selected multiple things on the list, but it only let me pick one.
Okay, well, what would the multiple things have been?
I would have said how to video, how to written,
Yeah.
some meeting facilitation, and possibly some workshops.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, I'm going to move on because we've only got 4 minutes left here. Yeah, that's great. If you've got ideas like Josh, just pop them in the chat and I'll take notes of those at the end. Okay. Now we're looking at making Nadia's time available to our funded organizations for a series of workshops similar to what she did with BC Artistic Swimming. So 2 separate workshops. Nadia, were you saying they're 2.5 hours each roughly?
Yeah, so it just depends on what works. So I think for most people, 2.5 hours at a time is good, unless you want to take a full day, and then it would be a 5-hour workshop.
5-hour workshop, and then you do a 90-minute follow-up later on, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so just for us to help try and budget for that and build out a contract, this is really helpful to have an idea of how many organizations might want to do that. So we have 11 yeses so far. I think you can keep submitting answers even when I turn the slides off. So I'll come back and download these later and make sure that we've got a full count there. That's really helpful. And I think that's it for the Menti. So I'm going to stop sharing. And Nadia, if you want to make sure that we've got your contact info there. Excellent.
Sorry for the ugly slide. I just adjusted it while you were doing the Menti. Oh my goodness. So I should have just used my words. I want to thank everyone for the important work that you do. I just think that you are all doing crucial work in our society and in our province, and it's amazing. And the skills that you all have in managing conflict that I know that you all do are incredible. So thank you. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much, everybody. And I'm reading the chat. I'm trying to take this all in. The message I'm hearing is that there is an appetite for this work, absolutely, and in different formats that appeal to different stakeholder types. So just to try and make it easy for you to link to content that can go out to whoever in your own organizations and in your clubs. So we're working on that. That's my whole job. that's what I'm trying to do. So thank you so much for your time. We'll let you go a whole minute early. Thank you. Take care, everyone.